Well, we have one last storyteller. Greg Nesteroff is going to come speak before us. I had something to say about Greg, but I don't know. I think I'll wing it. Greg grew up in the Spokane Valley, and I think I first met him when he was in my wife's grade 6 class. And he was very notable even at that age. More recently, I was actually researching a story, and I found that it had been written by Greg. And he has actually been making quite his mark in storytelling in our region. And I'm very glad that he's going to finish off our festival tonight, this afternoon, sorry. He is going to be talking about Eli Carpenter, who has a history quite well connected with this Spokane Valley, and I think it's totally appropriate. And I'd like to share it with you. Great.
So, Eli Carpenter. I can tell you a little bit about him, but not a lot. Don't ask me where or when he was born, because nobody knows. Don't ask me what he looked like, because there were no pictures of him. And don't ask me what he did for the early part of his life, because he never told anyone. What I can tell you is how Eli Carpenter found a fortune and became a legend in his own time. The date is August 1891, place Ainsworth Hot Springs. Andy Jardine has just come back from the Blue Ridge Mountains with a spectacular discovery, high-grade lead-silver ore. Well, the camp is abuzz. At this time, Ainsworth is a small but thriving place with several stores and hotels, and it's about to get its own newspaper. Among those extremely interested in what Andy has found is one Eli Carpenter. Now, he might have been from France, or he could have been from Quebec. All we know is that he spoke French. He turned up in West Kootenay a couple of years earlier, after spending several years placer mining in East Kootenay. And along with a couple of partners, he staked 2 claims along Kootenay Lake, the Kent and the Dotel. Then he disappeared for a while, came back in the spring of 1891, and staked the Gem. Nothing much came from any of these claims. But with this latest discovery, Eli teams up with a fellow named Jack Seaton. Now, we don't know how they formed their partnership, only that they did. Seaton was an Irishman, born in Tennessee, left home when he was young, went to work in the mines in Colorado, then continued on to Montana, Idaho, and finally in 1889 got on at the Skyline mine in Ainsworth. So, Seaton and Carpenter set out from Ainsworth to the Slocan district, which to this point had been very seldom visited by prospectors. Although there is some indication that Eli knew where he was going and what he was looking for. One story says that while in East Kootenay, Eli heard about the riches of the Slocan from a Tunaka Indian who explored the area. Another story says that an outlaw named Bulldog Kelly, while on the run from the law, stumbled across some old mine workings. He told Eli about them and even drew him a little map. The stories say that Seaton and Carpenter were lost. On September the 9th, after spending probably 2 weeks roaming the hills, they were running low on supplies and ready to give up. So they climbed a mountain, trying to find a route back to Ainsworth to get their bearings. But they couldn't agree on the best way to go, so they split up. Carpenter went west towards Slocan Lake, Seaton went east toward Kootenay Lake. And from this point on, just about everything is up for debate. There are 20 versions of what happened next, and none of them agree on any 2 details. It may have been that Seaton stumbled across a promising outcropping of galena ore, but was almost immediately overtaken by Carpenter, who changed his mind about the best way out. Or it might have been Carpenter who made the discovery, only he realized he needed Seaton's help in order to stake it. You see, Eli was illiterate. He signed his name in the X. At any rate, they jointly staked a claim, which they called the Pain. Now, why did they call it that? Well, certainly it was a pain getting up there. But they spelled it P-A-Y-N-E. And the question has only ever been addressed once, in a letter written in 1939, now held by the UBC Special Collections. And in it, an old-time prospector said his understanding was that they named it after Thomas Paine, the writer and atheist. Well, what that might say about Seton and Carpenter. Who knows? At any rate, they hack off a bit of this ore and hightail it back to Ainsworth. And now things really start to get murky. You see, the history books have not always been kind to Eli Carpenter. They question his honesty, his integrity, his motives. They say he double-crossed Seton by taking the ore to be assayed. And when it proved to be incredibly rich, he showed Seton assay results from a different claim that was virtually worthless. But I don't believe it, and neither should you. We're going to give Eli the benefit of the doubt. Now then, as I was saying, when he got back to Ainsworth, the scrupulously honest Eli Carpenter took the ore samples to Scotty Williams for assay. Scotty's findings were that it averaged 30 ounces of silver to the ton, which was not worth too much. But then somebody else, and it might have been Charlie Olson, the bartender, or it could have been William Hennessy, another prospector. Somebody else got his hands on the ore samples and took them to Charlie Stallberg, a different assayer, a better assayer. Well, Charlie's findings were all over the map. They ranged somewhere from 125 ounces of silver to the ton and 340. Definitely something to get excited about. Well, pretty soon the word was out and everybody in Ainsworth knew what was going on. But only Seton and Carpenter knew exactly where the vein was. And Seton swore he would never go back. That left Carpenter, who wanted to stake more claims, looking for a new partner. And he found one in a German count named Ernest Bielenberg, who was an interesting fellow in his own right. So Carpenter and Bielenberg slipped quietly out of Ainsworth so that nobody would follow them, and they decided to take the long way around. They head to Nelson, stock up on supplies, then take a train out to Slocan Crossing, and began heading up the Slocan River. By some accounts, it was a rather harrowing journey. Their little boat overturned in the lake, although they managed to swim to shore. And then it was several more days of arduous hiking and climbing and bushwhacking until they finally made it back to the Pain. And once there, Eli could not believe his eyes. There was Jack Seton and 20 other prospectors. They'd already staked 26 claims covering every promising inch of the mountainside. You see, when Carpenter and Bielenberg left Ainsworth, Seton and his gang got in their boats and went the other way. They paddled up Kootenai Lake and then followed the Caslow River back to the Pain, got there 2 full days before Carpenter and Bielenberg. One of the claims that Jack Seton staked was in partnership with William Hennessy, Jack Hennessy, John McGuigan, and Frank Flint. They called it the Noble Five. But as one person remarked, there's nothing very noble about the way they treated Eli Carpenter. Eli was mad, but there really wasn't much he could do. He and Bielenberg did manage to stake a couple of little claims. They never amounted to much. Carpenter still owned his half interest in the Pain, mind you. Even that he sold quickly and didn't get much for. Apparently, Spokane mining interests paid him $500. Seton sold his share for $1,000. Both short. A few years later, half interest in the Pain went for $75,000. Work on the mine began in earnest in 1895, and it quickly proved to be one of the richest in the Slocan. The discovery of the Pain led to the staking of hundreds of other claims and the birth of towns like Sandon and Silverton and New Denver. Jack Seton never really got to see much of it, though. In 1893, his brother came for a visit and died suddenly. So Jack took the body back to Tennessee for burial. I don't know if whatever the brother had was contagious, but pretty soon Jack was a sick man himself. On the way back, he spent 6 weeks convalescing in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And by the time he'd reached Spokane, he'd taken a turn for the worse. He became bedridden. 10 days later, he was dead. As for Eli, he kept on prospecting. In 1892, he and a fellow named Spence staked some claims up around Trout Lake. Then he went up to the Big Bend country around Revelstoke, came back to the Slocan, did some work in the Calumet and Hecla mine, and also some prospecting on the Arrow Lakes. In His claims included the Spanish, the Reno, and my favorite, the Get There Eli. But in 1895, a newspaper reported, Eli Carpenter is today living in New Denver. He's getting to be an old man and has a very limited bank account. Probably, if he were to visit many of the mines in the district, the owners would not give him a job. Now let's move ahead in time a little bit. The date is May 24th, 1897, the place, Slocan City. A celebration is going on marking Queen Victoria's birthday, and over 600 people have come from neighboring towns like Nicusk and Three Forks and Roseberry, all aboard the brand new CPR sternwheeler SS Slocan. And on the main street, a stout hemp rope is tied from the corner of the Arlington Hotel, the finest establishment in town, to the second story of the Cousins and Kavanaugh General Store across the street. And there, on the balcony of the hotel, wearing long underwear and holding a piece of pipe, stands Eli Carpenter. Now, at this juncture, it's important to understand that what happened on the tightrope that day was told and retold and exaggerated and embellished and distorted for the next 100 years. But at the time, Slocan had two newspapers, the Slocan City News and the Slocan Pioneer. The only copies of these newspapers that still exist are in the BC Legislative Library in Victoria. They're not really available to the public. But about 5 years ago, this is our time now, a man who wishes to remain anonymous pulled some strings, got his hands on these newspapers. And in them, he found two separate accounts of what actually happened on the tightrope that day, conclusively separating fact from fiction. This is what really happened. At 3 o'clock, a whistle blew on the SS Slocan, announcing that the performance was about to begin. Eli stepped confidently onto the rope and began crossing, without a slip or hesitation. He was completely at ease on the rope, and completely sober. You see, some versions of the story say that Eli had been, well, not the case. In fact, the tightrope walk had been planned days in advance, and one of the papers said Eli walked it as coolly as if he were on the terra firma and far more gracefully. Well, Eli made it to the other side. The crowd let out a big cheer, probably a sigh of relief. But Eli wasn't finished. He starts going backwards. Can you imagine the reaction of the crowd at this point? It was as if you woke up one morning and your dog could talk. You see, what they didn't know was that before becoming a prospector in the hills of the Slocan, Eli had been a circus performer. In fact, he learned from the best. He was the understudy to the great Blondin, the first man to walk a tightrope over Niagara Falls. And 15 years earlier, Eli himself had walked a 5-story tightrope over a street in New Haven, Connecticut, with his wife on his back. Oh yes, Eli's wife. She never came out to the Kootenai, and there is a story which may or may not be true, but I'll tell it to you anyway. It seems that after leaving Barnum Circus, Eli showed up in Wild Horse Gulch in East Kootenai and began placer mining. His wife stayed behind in New Hampshire, Eli's sister. And every fall for 6 years, Eli sent by express from Fort Steele not less than $2,000 in gold to his wife. Then one day, Eli got a letter from his sister, which said that his wife was about to become a mother. Eli didn't take the news so well, considering he hadn't been home in 6 years. So he promptly quit the wild horse diggings and headed off for the unknown Kootenai Lake country. But back to the title. You're going forward and backward, Eli did a trapeze act. And their minds thoroughly boggled. The audience took up a collection for him. It came to $50. That night, a banquet was held at the Arlington Hotel for pioneers of the Slocan district. You can bet that Eli was the guest of honor. Alas, it was to be Eli's final hurrah in the Slocan. That fall, he and a fellow named Peter McNichol packed up and headed for the gold fields of the Klondike. One of the newspapers said, "Mr. Carpenter is well along in years, but is accustomed to the rigors of mountain life and expects to come out all right." Well, they went up the Peace River, got as far as Edmonton, and decided not to go any further until the spring. Nothing more was heard from them for close to a year. Then came the news. Eli had died. Well, the tributes began pouring into this hardy fella who led the rush to the silvery Slocan. And by this time, the pick that he had used in discovering the Payne mine was recognized as a museum-worthy artifact. It was on display in New Denver. You know what? Eli Carpenter came back from the dead. In February of 1899, he was reported alive and well and expected to turn up another big steak or a bottle of the finest furs. In fact, we know Eli made it to the Yukon because he was listed in the 1901 Dawson City Directory. What's more, in 1903, the Yukon Daily Morning Sun printed an ad that said somebody was looking for him. Described Eli as about 55, French-Canadian, short of stature, and said he'd been on Victoria Gulch a couple of years earlier. Now, the man who was looking for him lived in Vancouver, and his name was Luke Carpenter. Could have been Eli's brother. We know he had one because in 1897, Eli's nephew, T. Carpenter, came to visit him in Slocan. There was a Luke Carpenter who died in Vancouver in 1917, and I looked up his death certificate that didn't really provide any proofs. It was said that Eli invested in mining operations in the Klondike and was met with considerable success. Only climactic and other conditions over which he had no control were such as to deprive him of all of his worldly possessions. In other words, he went broke. But Eli was not one to waste time cursing his luck. He left the Yukon, went to Vancouver, and then set out for the next big thing, the gold fields of Australia. We don't know how long he was gone for, but by Eli's own admission, while the gold was there all right, the water that he needed to get it out was not. So Eli gave up again, came back to BC, this time to the Shuswap. In 1913, he began homesteading at a place called Anstey Arm, not far from Salmon Arm. It was said that he did a lot of construction work, proved his resourcefulness in many ways. In April 1916, he got on as a night watchman with the Sovereign Lumber Company at Annis, a little place on the CBR line between Sycamoose and Canoe. And he was still there when he died, for real this time, on January 24th, 1917. The coroner had a tough time filling out the death certificate. Date of birth, place of birth, maybe Quebec. Father's name, not sure. Mother's name. Age, about 75. Eli Carpenter didn't leave a will, but according to his probate file, the man who co-discovered the Payne mine, which produced more than $5 million worth of ore, died with $54.56 to his name, plus 2 checks worth $40 each. And he also owed $60.90 to a store in Sycamoose. Eli Carpenter was buried in an unmarked grave in Salmon Arm. In 1926, the BC Prospectors Association talked about building a monument in his honor. But it never happened because it got bogged down in an argument over who the true discoverer of the Slocan was. It hardly mattered. Even if Eli wasn't the first prospector into the district, and I'm quite sure he wasn't, his contribution was well worth the monument. Eli does have some legacies, though. Carpenter Creek, which flows through Sandon and New Denver. Mount Carpenter, which overlooks New And if you go to Slocan today, in the RV park, there's a mural that shows a man wearing red flannel underwear walking a tightrope. That is all I know about the enigmatic